Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our special Project Recipe Talk for Project Kin with Jude Rhodes. Jude joins us with as a unique combination of skills. She is both a professional genealogist with stories of our generations, as well as a registered nurse. And she brings this unique combination of talents and perspectives to bear on a topic that she has seen and learned from extensively from her experience as a nurse, where she works with patients who are suffering from a variety of different dementias. This is a story that many of you who know me will know is very close to my heart, as I was primary caregiver for my mother for over 8 years before she passed in 2022. So this is a topic that touches me very personally, as that coincided with my journey in the family history space. So with that as an introduction, let me turn over the table here to Jude Rhodes. As we get going, I do appreciate, I see that all of you have turned your microphones on mute, which is helpful. And your video on, so we know who we're talking to. And during the program, we will conclude at the end with enough time for a conversation, feedback, and thoughts. If you have immediate points of clarification, kindly drop them into the chat. You can also drop questions to be asked later into the chat as well. I'll be watching a thread on that so that Jude doesn't have to, and certainly will interrupt if we need to for clarifications. How's that? All right. So with that, and pardon the occasional interruption of my feline companions here, let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead, please, Jude.
Oh, thank you so much for a lovely introduction, Barbara. That was fabulous. And hello, everybody. I'm looking forward to having a discussion at the end of the slides, and I'll be able to see you all and have a good chat. So first of all, I hope you can all understand my Yorkshire accent. I'm trying my very best to not sound too Yorkshire, but everything that I'm saying more or less is on the slides. So if there's any problem there, we can go over it after the slides and in the discussion. So I hope that's all okay. So yes, I have got a passion about making sure people who are living with a dementia feel that they are still valued in society and in their life, and that we show an understanding of how they remember things. And that's the crucial bit, the clue as to how we can then have meaningful conversations with people. And for this, I draw on family history. So there's some like theory bits in this, but bear with me. It will all make sense by the end of the presentation, I hope. And if it doesn't, just ask me any questions as we are in the discussion. So let's look at dementia. There are so many different types of dementias. The most commonly known one is Alzheimer's. But first of all, here are some scary stats. This is for the US. And as we can see, reading this, almost 7 million people in America are currently living with Alzheimer's. So that's just Alzheimer's. And it's going to more or less double. It's rising and rising and rising as the population ages. It is an age-related disease, but not completely. 3 years ago, it was recorded that Alzheimer's disease was the 5th cause of death in people over 65 years of age. Now, that's quite scary. We often, we hear about different cancers and heart disease, but the 5th cause of death. So we need to make the lives of those people living with a dementia the best life they have while they're living with the dementia. By the age of 45, the risk of Alzheimer's in women is 1 in 5 and 1 in 10 in men. Yes, I'm afraid as a woman, it is more prevalent amongst women. And for the over 65s, there are about 1 in 9 people living with Alzheimer's. So it's massive, it's huge, and just about everybody will have been touched by this in some way, either through family or friends. So why do I use family history and dementia? It's all pretty obvious, really, but I've got it here on a slide. Family history goes back in time, and we'll learn why that is so important. It relates to known people and places. It's relevant to that person. And this is where the dignity and the feeling of comfort comes in. It involves current and past family members. It's evocative, and what we're going to be looking at is what can trigger a memory and evoke memories. Family history is common ground between family members, and it's meaningful. And I'm worried that my animations are not working. But never mind, we can plow on. So dementia is a general term for loss of memory, as well as language, problem solving, and other thinking abilities. So dementia isn't just about forgetfulness. It's way more than that. It's a disease. Alzheimer's, as I say, is the most common cause, and dementia is an overall term that we use for all these specific medical conditions. So, language where they can't retrieve the appropriate word, can't solve problems of what order to put clothes on, for instance, but it affects mobility as well. So a massive range of problems. Dementia is a disease. It's caused by abnormal brain changes, and that triggers a decline in the ability to think. They decline in the thinking skills, which is, becomes severe enough to impair daily life and independent living. For some people, dementia can change their behavior, their feelings, their relationships. I've heard so many times, oh, he was such a quiet man, and look at him now, he's always cross. He's not changed himself. The disease has caused these changes. So if we look at the brain very briefly, it's not going to be an anatomy and physiology lesson, I promise you. So the disease leads to nerve cell death. When something's died, it can't come back. So those nerve cells, that tissue loss, which is throughout the brain, is irretrievable. So in effect, the brain shrinks. If the brain is shrinking, it's reducing our abilities. And one of the crucial things that is involved in this process is the forming and storing of memories. And we need to understand this briefly to understand how we're going to have a meaningful conversation with somebody who is living with dementia. And that leads me on to, I create memory books for people with memory loss. So not always dementia. There are other reasons why people may have memory loss. So it's a book for memory triggers leading to meaningful conversations. And that's going to be the hub of what we're talking about this evening. So I'll be going a bit back and forth between memory and books and triggers, but as I say, it will hopefully all come together. So memories, what are they? Well, we know what they are. We can remember what we had for lunch, or in your case, probably breakfast. But there's a lot more to it. Memory refers to the psychological process of acquiring, storing, retaining, and then later retrieving information. So we get a memory. Someone's shown me a photograph, a new photograph, say, of my granddaughter, and I've now got that memory of that photograph. It is stored in my head, but I can retain that memory. It stays there. And it, when I think of my granddaughter, boom, out it pops, and I can remember seeing that photograph. So it's later retrieved. It might be a month and something happens where it's like, do you remember when Neve did such and such? And I'll be like, oh yes, I remember that photograph. And it's later retrieved. But if there's nerve damage, as there is with dementia, all this doesn't work as we want it to. It affects the acquiring a memory. It affects that making a new memory. So for someone with dementia, when they're shown a new image, a new photograph, they cannot retain that. It doesn't get stored and it doesn't get remembered. Therefore, it cannot be retrieved later. And this is really crucial when we come to discussing how we can make a book to help people who have a dementia. So there's three main types of dementia. There's the sensory memory, which I've just mentioned, the image, which is very, very brief. There's short-term memory, which is a bit longer, but the one we're going to really focus on this today is long-term memory, and that can last a lifetime. And they're the really precious, long-standing memories that we have from when we were children. So what I want everybody to do now is start your planning during this talk. So if you have got a person in mind that you would like to focus on for learning more about dementia or memory loss, or if you're wanting to go ahead and start a book, now is the time to start thinking about that person, because throughout the rest of the slides, we'll look at things that will help you. So identify a person to focus on. This could well be planning for the future. It does not have to be someone right now. And it does not have to be someone with a dementia. An example of this is my mother is 96 years old. She's amazing. She has problems, but she does not have dementia. Her memory is pretty good still. However, I created one of my books for my mum because when you're 96, most of your siblings and friends are no longer with us, and it provides her happy memories. And she loves looking through that book. So identify a person. Throughout the session, jot down ideas for creating memories for that person. So grab a pen and paper and start jotting down the ideas as we talk through them. Also through the slides, jot down ideas of where you will find the information you need, and that will all become clearer. And then not during the slides, obviously, but in the future, start to learn about the historical context of the time period you're going to be looking at. What was happening locally? What was happening nationally? What was happening globally? These are the stories and the time period that you need to be focusing on. I hope that all makes sense. So we're back to long-term memory. People who suffer with a dementia talk about the more distant past. They talk about their parents and their siblings far more than they will do about their own grandchildren. The reason is that their grandchildren are newer memories. Their parents and their siblings are very long-term memories that they can still recall. To understand more about this, there's a web link there. This is a UK one, but there's loads in the US, and it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. They're all helpful. I've already mentioned, but I can't stress it enough, that about the inability to create new memories. These are just not recorded in that person's brain and therefore cannot be recalled later. So I have seen in my work, more times than I wish, family and friends visiting somebody who has a dementia and pointing at a photograph and saying, of course you remember who they are. You saw them last week. That is just so frustrating because the poor person cannot remember because it was only last week when they saw them, and they have not been able to make that recent memory or store it to recall it. So that becomes really frustrating on both sides. Those that have been made many, many years ago and have been recalled are the ones that bring comfort to the person. They're still able to recall very detailed memories from earlier life. And what is so fantastic is, while you're having a conversation with somebody who's discussing memories from their childhood, from decades ago, you are learning so much more about your own family history. Things that no matter how much research we do, we will not find those golden nuggets of memories. And that's why it's so useful and important in family history. So let's have a look at this picture. So this is a photograph of my grandmother's house as it is today. My grandmother died in the 1960s, but I remember this house extremely well, with the fondest of memories. And it's the house where my mother and all her siblings were born. And sometimes I'll take my mum on a trip out and we go back to this area, which is about an hour's drive from where we live now, and drive in front of the house. And I know that the house does not look exactly the same as it did when my grandma lived there. I understand that. But if you were showing someone with a dementia this newer photo, it wouldn't make a great deal of sense to them. And they probably would say, no, I didn't live there. No, look, the cellar's wrong or the steps are wrong. They remember the house from when they were younger, not from how it looks now. So I know that house used to have a dark green door. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing to here, the very bottom where there's some small double doors. There were no doors there when my grandmother and my mother lived there. That was, there was just a small doorway into the cellar. So we need to be very aware that what looks like something we can comprehend and perceive in the changes of time, the person with dementia doesn't have that ability. Because I can't see everybody and I'm just going through the slides, I feel like I'm really whizzing through this, and I hope I'm not going too fast, but it will give us loads of time to revisit slides to chat about. So, okay. So if someone with dementia was looking at this picture and said, no, that's not where I lived, that doesn't make any sense to me, what we can do is pick out the relevant details to evoke memories. So what I've done is I've drawn a plan of what the downstairs of the house looked like. It was only a tiny house with a big family living there. So I've drawn this plan, and it's got where steps went down to the cellar, where steps went upstairs, the scullery, that is an English word, I think, for a little kitchen. So we've got the living room, lounge, sitting room, whatever you want to call it here. And there was a very large range fire. The door into the house was up the steps here, and the toilet was outside. So it was there. So to go to the toilet, when we were at my grandmother's house, we'd go from the sitting room into the scullery, down the cellar steps, through the cellar, outside, and then down the steps again to the toilet. Now that might sound, well, who wants to know about that? But what it does is gives you a focus for talking about the house to the person with dementia. Not this house, this is only relevant to my family. But you can do the very same thing. Look on, I'm trying to think of the word for estate agents in the US. You'll be able to tell me later.
Real estate.
Real estate, thank you, Barbara. It was in the back of my mind. Look on something like the real estate websites, and you'll see house plans. And if you look at a street, a road, an avenue of where that house was, okay, pick up that house plan and work from it. You can look at the deeds of a house. You can ask older relatives. And something I adore is living history museums. These are fabulous for finding ideas for how people used to live. So in the UK, there's living history museums that are massive outdoor places, and then they'll have houses through time. And so that gives you an idea. So I think you've got the gist of things, that it's picking up on how things used to be. So this is just an example of many, many, many things that you can do. But I liked this example, and I used it with my mum, who, as I say, doesn't have dementia, but she would then start telling me about incidents that happened when they were in the cellar, and how the girls would all fight to get the first through the door, and loads of lovely memories. So speaking of my mum, here is my mum with my auntie, her sister, who was only 15 months older. They do look a bit like twins. Now my mum, as I say, is okay. This is about, how long ago will this be? This is only about 6 years ago. My auntie, who's sitting in the chair, she had dementia. I can tell just looking at her, because there's not that engagement in her eyes. It looks as if she's looking at something, but she was being a bit what we'd call vacant. My auntie, who I was extremely close to, really, really close to, she went into a nursing home because her dementia progressed so much that we couldn't manage at home. And we knew that her time was getting very, very limited. And I took my mum to visit my auntie. They were very close sisters. They were the closest of all the family. And my auntie had been really poorly and had a spell in hospital, and she had had sepsis. A miracle that she recovered, because she was unwell and old. She was in her 90s then. And we were sitting in her room. My auntie was in bed. And I just said, "Oh, Auntie Dot, you've been so poorly, haven't you?" And she just looked at me. She perked up, she smiled, her face became animated. And what had happened was she had immediately taken my comment to 70 years ago, 70 years previously, when she had been very, very poorly with TB. And my mum used to visit her in the sanatorium when my Auntie Dot had TB. So that one comment of, "Oh, you've been really poorly," me meaning the sepsis the week before, immediately was taken by my auntie as, oh yes, I have been really poorly, I've had TB. And then that started this amazing conversation between my mum and my auntie. I'd already told my mum, you know, just go along with anything Auntie Dot says. Don't correct her about time periods and things. Just go along with, you know, what she says. Stay in the moment with her. And that is so important, staying in the moment. So my mum did really well. And she said, oh, yes, you did have TB, didn't you, Dot? And they started this chat about how my mum used to visit and the other people who were in the sanatorium and the clothes that they wore. And then my auntie said to my mum, oh, have you told mum that you're expecting yet? I nearly collapsed in laughter, but I didn't. I smiled. And it transpires what had happened at the time when they were in their early 20s was that my mum had visited my auntie when she was poorly with TB. She had told her that she was expecting her first baby and that she hadn't told their mother yet because she was telling my auntie first. That is one heck of a memory that my auntie, with really quite late stage dementia, remembered that. And it ended up a great long chat and conversation. The girls, I was going to say, because that's what they became in this chat. My mum and my auntie, they were giggling and laughing, and it was the most wonderful time. And it was the last time I ever saw my auntie. And I think the power of that is quite remarkable and something that we can all, you know, bear in mind. And I think when we get to the discussion later, it'd be interesting to hear if any of you have had a similar experience. I've put on the slide here, did you record it? Now, I didn't record the conversation that my mum and my auntie were having. I was enjoying being in the moment with them. Yes, I had my phone with me. Yes, I could have recorded it. But I enjoyed being in the moment, and that's what I chose to do. If you do record something, you do need consent to do it. That's the nurse coming out in me. You really should have consent from the person. Now, a person with dementia cannot usually give consent because they don't have what we call the capacity to make that decision. So there are other things to bear in mind. So that was a conversation. Now we're going to have a little look at some images. As I say, my animation isn't working. I'm having such problems with Zoom at the moment, but hey ho, you're doing well. So with photographs, images, keep in the time period of the relevant memory. So important. So most people have gone to shops in their lives. For women, it was a daily occurrence. There was, you know, it was a daily trip of going to the shop to get something for the meal. To show a photo, if the person said, oh, you know, I used to know Mr. Smith in the shop, we'd often have a chat when I went to get, you know, the groceries. Don't then think, oh, I'll show them an image of a shop and you show a supermarket, because that would make no sense whatsoever. But find on images. There's so many that have Creative Commons licenses now, or you can buy the image, but find those images that are relevant. If you showed somebody this image of the woman talking to the shopkeeper, there's so much you can chat about here. The food that was on the shelves, how things were packaged, the scales, weighing things out, because we would buy flour perhaps loose and it would be weighed. And that immediately gives a whole new conversation, and it helps the younger members of the family to learn about the past. We will obviously be talking about children, but we need to be talking about the children that the person knew as a child in the past, not about children today. So this top image up here, which looks totally alien to me even, you know, of two teenagers, one's on his computer, the other one's on the phone, taking a photo of him perhaps. That would be meaningless as entertainment time for children to anybody now who has dementia. So we need to keep it relevant. There's the children here playing in the sand. There's the children here playing on like a merry-go-round that they've made out of an old wheel, having great fun. And that is how people used to play. Absolutely fabulous fun. And I'm sure we can all remember those days. But this is where the person living with dementia will be remembering. They'll be remembering those times, and they will tell you about what they played with, what they got up to. My mum and my auntie have told me stories about when they used to go play in a tunnel at the bottom of a lady's large garden, and they weren't meant to be there, but they played out for hours there, making little dens and things. Great, great stories. And the beauty of that is, if they tell you that, you can then another time bring that up as a trigger for a memory. If someone has dementia, it doesn't matter how many times you say the same thing, really. It's fresh each time. So how do you know the time period that you need to be focusing on? It's not, you know, set in stone, but roughly I have put this slide together. So this gives you a rough idea of the times period that you need to focus on, and you'll soon guess that it's the first 40 years of life generally. It will vary from person to person, and it will vary depending on how advanced any dementia is. So let's go with me, the green box. I was born in the 1950s. So for me, it would be sensible to focus on images, life experiences for me up until about 30 years ago. Now, 30 years seems a long time. My children were still very young, but that is the appropriate time to be focusing on. My children, I would remember as them as young children, not as grown adults as they are now. And I've heard lots and lots and lots of times people asking for their son or the daughter, and their son and daughter are actually stood in front of them, but they do not recognize them as an adult. And then when the grandchild walks in, they think that is their child, if there's a look, a similarity. And so this is absolutely where I'm trying to get at, about, you know, the time periods to look at. For my mum, if I was looking at the years to focus on for my mum, who was born in the 1920s, I'd be looking in the years up to 1970 and not, you know, much further on than that. So that might come as a bit of a shock to people, thinking, gosh, that's a long time ago. But there's loads we can do to find the relevant information, because what we're trying to do is provide triggers for that long-term memory. That is our aim. So you can go on the internet and you can, for instance, here, the fabulous The People History website. It's absolutely wonderful. You can look at different decades throughout the globally. You can just look at music. You can look at all sorts of things. It is fantastic. And this will really help you to see the sorts of things that you need to focus on. But just for this talk, for this slide, I've looked at major news events from that website. And as we can see, I've focused on the 1950s, and it gives such a range. So there was the television program, I Love Lucy. I remember I Love Lucy. It was global. And so knowing, that that was the program at the time, we now know if we were looking to, trigger memories for somebody, we would have a bit of a Google about and look for information about I Love Lucy. And I'm sure you would find a snippet that you could play for the person that we're focusing on. Elizabeth I came to the throne. Massive one here in the US in 1954. The Supreme Court rules that racial segregation is unconstitutional. And that will really have been a massive part of somebody's understanding of the time in 1954. And the year later, the amazing Rosa Parks was arrested because she refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. What an amazing lady. There was the Suez Crisis, and the USSR launched Sputnik. So these are all just, a tiny amount of the sort of things that you can pick up on, and these will trigger memories. One word of caution: try to avoid putting things there that will upset people. You will know the person you're focusing on, so try to avoid things that will cause upset. For instance, World War II, I try to avoid that unless the person brings it up, because I do not know, and very few of us know, exactly what their true memories are of those awful events. So we don't want to evoke unhappy memories. Likewise, I don't bring up the death of a family member unless the person does. Because then you need to know how to cope with that. And speaking of that, about, if a family member's died, another thing, thankfully people have got a much better understanding about this now. But, in the not too distant past, somebody would say, let's say Mrs. Smith was asking, where's my husband? Where's my husband? And if somebody said, well, your husband died. He died years ago. You know that? No, that is the very first time that person's hearing that news, because they've forgotten. They haven't been able to recall the time when they learned that their husband had died. So it's distraction techniques. If someone who's got real dementia is told that someone's died, in their head, that's the first time they're hearing it. So we don't want to evoke that sort of situation. So, how to have meaningful conversations exploring memories through family history. We've been talking about this. Well, I have. No one's had a chance yet, but I've been talking about it. And for me, having meaningful conversations is what it's all about. Conversations that mean something to the person we're having the conversation with. It's not about us, it's about them. So we'll have a little look. Sometimes these chats, when visiting someone that you love dearly has dementia, can be hard work, desperately hard work, and very frustrating, and everybody ends up upset. so often people talk about what they have done on a particular day. Oh, I did this at work today. Oh, I've been to the shops today and bought X, Y, Z. Oh, I've just seen the new film that's come out. That's meaningless to the person with dementia that we're chatting to. So they seem to be nodding off, they're looking at you blankly, and it's because what you are currently doing and talking about is not relevant to that person. Therefore, there is no engagement. So it's all about the person, not about us. And the key is providing these opportunities for them to reminisce about the times that are personal and relevant to them. And a personal family history can help to achieve this. I've mentioned photographs before. Now, that shouldn't be showing just yet, so let's pretend it's not there. So photographs are so important. Keep them relevant to the distant time. So if we're talking about their sibling, we'd show a photograph of them as when they were a child, not as they are now as an older person. Unless they see that person very, very often, maybe on a daily basis. The same goes, and this sounds really, really harsh, the same goes for showing photographs of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That image, that short-term memory hasn't been achieved, therefore cannot be recalled. It is meaningless. We're thinking about the person with dementia here, not us. And that can seem really tough, and people often don't like that I mention that, but I continue to mention it because I think it's really important. So we've mentioned images of shops, but what about images of the transport, the clothes, anything that you can think of when the person was younger, the places that they went to, their school. You can often find these old images online. The cinemas, the dance halls, the church they attended, parks they went to. I've mentioned the house before, but the furniture that was in those houses, it was so different from the furniture we have today. And anything relating to hobbies. If somebody loved gardening, get out old gardening photographs, old images of packets of seeds, anything that you can think of to do with gardening. Or it might be knitting, or it might be being a motor mechanic or mending their car, whatever it was that they did in their leisure time. So photographs really do paint 1,000 words. This is the photograph of the original fireplace in my mum and her sister's bedroom, which was in the attic of the house I showed you. Thankfully, it is still there. Thank goodness. So when I show my mum this photograph, oh my goodness, I hear so many memories. She starts giggling about the things that her and her sisters got up to in the attic when they were meant to be fast asleep, the conversations they had. It is wonderful. So a simple image, a fireplace. Who'd have thought a fireplace could provide so many memories and topics to chat about? And the thing is, then you can recall what you've chatted about and bring it up again the next time you meet. Sounds and smells. Oh my goodness, these are so evocative, aren't they? I've only got to smell an old bar of soap that my grandmother used to wash her steps with, and I'm straight there as a little girl helping my grandmother wash the steps. Now, I'm afraid because my animations aren't working, this slide has come out totally higgledy-piggledy wrong. So we've to pretend that the central image isn't there for a second. So what the writing underneath says is, consider the music that was played in that younger person's life. In the 1950s, for instance, there was Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, Bill Haley and the Comets, all these people, and then there's the photograph there of the three very glamorous ladies, the Fontaine sisters. Get some of that music. You can get it online, play it on your phone when you're visiting the person. Find these old songs or the music that they loved. It might be classical music, it might be folk music, whatever they liked. Get it out and play it, and you'll see the smile on the face. Excuse me. If you can, buy the soap or the perfume or the aftershave that they used to use. This really does evoke memories. And the picture in the middle that I said don't look out for now, this is an advert for Lux toilet soap. Oh, sorry. And this will really evoke some memories. As I say, I could go on, but these are just some ideas that you can use to jot down for your focus person. So finding memory triggers. You need these to be able to create your book and to have the meaningful conversations. So be creative in how you gather relevant information. Go through the person's old photographs if you possibly can. You may not know the context or the people in the photograph, but the individual will. I have been clearing out my parents' house very, very recently and have got hundreds and thousands of photographs. Hardly any have the name of the people written on the back or the place that were taken. I am so lucky that I can still take them to my mum and say, who was this? Where were you when this happened? Do that if you possibly can. Ask another relative, an aunt, an uncle, whoever it may be, and find out as much as you can about that photograph, because this is the golden moment when we can do that. I know my time is running out rapidly for being able to ask my mum things. And then I've got nobody else. She's the last person in her generation in our family. So write down the names of the people, the place, the date, why they were there, whose wedding it was at, where they were on holiday, whatever it might be. Other things that you can do, and I've alluded to this already, is visit the person's childhood home. I've put here, use the 1939 register. Apologies, that's the UK, but there are equivalents in the US that I'll come to. Write up that visit. And if you are able, as I was, take the person. So I took my mum and, yes, she kind of gathered her thoughts and realized that and she does not have dementia, as I keep saying. She realized she was outside the house where she grew up, and then all these memories come. And she then said, oh, let's go for a walk. I said, where are we going, Mum? And she said, just come along here with me. And she showed me a gate into a load of undergrowth. And it was the gate to their allotment that they used to have, where they had their hens and their vegetables, etc. I didn't know that before. I knew they had an allotment, but I didn't know where it was. Take the person out in the car, have a trip around and drive to the familiar childhood areas. Write up the stories. And as I've mentioned before, visit a living museum. If you can go with the person, great. If not, just do it yourself. Take your children. Get them to have an understanding of the past. I added this to the book for my mum, but I use the same concept in other books for people. And it's a way of guiding the individual to the memory. So this photograph looks very grey and very boring, but the arrows show you, I've got here where the individual grew up, and then I can talk to that person, tracking their walk to school, and then again, the way they would walk to their grandparents' house. People live far apart nowadays, but not so much in the past. So you can do what's called an ancestral walk, and you can plot the walk that somebody would have made. So it might be their journey from home to work. Where did they go? It doesn't have to be a walk. They may have driven there, but plot it. And then that brings loads of things you can talk about for discussion. You can use the old maps. In the UK, I use the National Library of Scotland, which covers all of the UK, but you have the equivalents in the US. They are wonderful, our old maps. And for family historians out there, I use the FAN method. So what is the FAN method? It's family, associates, and neighbours. And this is exactly the people that we need to focus on for looking at the family history for this individual. So for family, we'd be looking at birth and baptism records, marriage, death and burial, if appropriate. Only if appropriate, but it works for you, for the family historian, because you know then how old the individual we're focusing on may have been when a parent, an auntie, a grandparent might have died. Use the censuses. This is for going back to their grandparents more than likely, or great-grandparents, but that is important. Associates. These might be witnesses at the wedding, godparents for them or their own children, employment records with the colleagues they worked with. If you have any wills, that might give you an idea of people that they knew or that their parents knew. Any societies them or their parents were involved in, the Sunday school that they went to, the school that they went to. And then neighbours. When we're children, our neighbours are really our immediate vicinity. These are the people that we see on a daily basis. These are the people we see our parents chatting to in the road or over the fence. Use the census or more recent registers, electoral registers, directories, and the amazing newspapers to find out everything that you can about who were the neighbours and the associates of the person that we're focusing on. This doesn't only just help to create the book that you might be wanting to do for your person, but it really helps to break down those dreaded brick walls in family history. So here's a checklist of records that you may evoke memories that for you to look at, to be able to discuss, that you'd use in your book. So census for grandparents to indicate addresses and occupations, census for the individual's own parents. The US censuses, the 1921 may be very, very appropriate, the most appropriate one to use, or in the UK, that would be the 1921 census. And that gives places of work. And that is really important because, someone might remember their parent coming in from work off a farm, from a factory, from a shop, and then you can mention that and they relate to that memory. If it's appropriate, the World War II registry. Now, for this, I am not focusing on those who actually went out and fought in the war. But here you can see this particular, and this is a US, website. It's a registry, and there's a section of US citizens from states and territories who contributed to the war effort. Now, these were everybody who contributed to the war effort, but did not go to war. These were, people who stayed at home on what we called a reserved occupation. So farmers, nurses, teachers, any builders, if there was a building boom, engineers, most definitely. So there's a lot of information there, and it's really quite interesting. In the UK or in Germany or France or Belgium, you have to consider the address of the evacuees. Coming back to my mum, we have the 1939 register in the UK that was taken. It's an alternative to a census, and it's a fabulous resource for UK family history research, because it's the most recent one that we have of where people lived, and it gives the date of birth. But it was all to do with the war, and it was to name every single person that there was in the UK at the time running up to the war, to see who was eligible to be called up to go fight. Now, my mum was evacuated, so she wasn't at her home address, but I found her where she was evacuated. I found images of the house. I found out the name of the family that her and one of her sisters were evacuated to. I could then tell my mum all that information, and she had actually forgotten the name of the family that they lived with, but all these memories came flooding back when I was able to use traditional family history methods to tell mum. We're coming to an end, you'll be very pleased to hear. So continuing with the checklist, their own marriages, the marriages of their siblings and close friends, occupational records, what did they do for work? If they had any ID cards, in the UK we had ration books. And I love this one, children's immunisation records and their own children's school books. This is still within the relevant time period that we're looking at. And so many mums keep these, and they're lovely records to refer back to. So, from frustrating visit experiences to a positive experience and a meaningful conversation. Don't look through current newspapers, buy an old newspaper. Everybody can use that same newspaper of all the people who visit that person, and it can be reused over and over again. Don't talk about your work and your holiday, find out about their work and their holidays. Don't chat about what's been on television recently, search old TV programs. And don't ask too many questions. Keep it slow paced to allow thinking time. So, reflect on your person. What have you already gathered for creating memories? What has been the main takeaway from this session? I can't wait for the discussion. What 3 things are you going to work on with your chosen person? And let's share some ideas. So I've just got a couple more slides, and then we can meet up. First of all, thank you for attending. Thank you so much for attending. I hope it's been of some use, but please join in the discussion to share ideas, ask questions, and just to have a chat. This is my business, Stories of Our Generations, my website and my email address. You can always drop me a line. I would love it. So this is the front of one of my books. I keep it very, very simple. So for this person, I have used 3 images of the 3 places that they lived in through their life, and just kept them really simple. And in it, there's the historical context. You're researching about their siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents. That's so important, the FAN method. And their spouse or partner, their children when the children were young. And I include a simple family tree. This isn't really for the individual. It's to help the people going through the book with the person. Younger people, their grandchildren perhaps, may not know the family tree. So I include a simple family tree. So as I've mentioned, contact me, take a photo of that if you want. Oh, this is my mum's hand. So we got the oldest person in the family and the youngest person in the family and took a photo on my kitchen table. So that's my mum and my youngest grandchild. And the last slide here is, these are some discussion prompts. The things that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, what's been the main takeaway from the session? What are you going to focus on for your focus person? And let's share some ideas.
Wow,
Thank you
Jude.
so much. I am now going to come out if I possibly can. Is it not letting me? Let me just see if I can
you just
get
need
out
to unshare. Just stop the share.
I've got to it's not. Let me, I'm going to just let me just close that.
There you go. Perfect. I want to thank you.
Except I cannot see it.
You can't see us?
That's crazy.
If you do an Alt tab on your, is a Windows computer, do an Alt tab.
Yes.
And you should see Zoom appear among the apps at the top. Select it.
Oh, Barbara, there you are.
Hi. I want to thank you so much for an absolutely fabulous talk. That was inspiring in so many ways. I did say at the top that I was going to keep this recording tight, which I will end in a moment. I do hope all of you can join us for a continuing discussion afterwards. And I will invite all of you now watching on the recording later to please go ahead and engage in the conversation. Take her prompts. You can go back and pause that video, go back to those questions that she's asked, and drop your answers in the messages, because Jude will be joining us in the conversation on the recording as well. So with that, again, join me in thanking Jude for a fabulous, inspiring talk. And I'll go ahead and stop.
Quick look through the chat and see what I need to catch up on. I've just seen that Peter's